Most people do not stay broke because they earn too little. They stay broke because their paycheck enters a broken operating system. I want you to think about that carefully. The problem is not only how much money comes in. The problem is the code that tells that money where to go the second it arrives. If your rent gets paid first, your subscriptions get paid first, your cravings get paid first, your image gets paid first, your lender gets paid first, and your future gets whatever is left. You do not have a money problem. You have a control problem. You are running an operating system that puts your own life at the bottom of the payment stack. I have spent my life looking at capital allocation. That sounds complicated, but it is not. Capital allocation is simply the art of deciding what gets fed and what gets starved. Every business does it, every investor does it, every household does it, whether they understand it or not. If you keep feeding consumption and starving ownership, you should not be surprised when you get more consumption and less ownership. That is not bad luck. That is code. Most people think wealth is built by dramatic moments. A brilliant stock pick, a giant promotion, a lucky break, a hot market. I have never seen life work that way for ordinary people. Wealth is usually built or destroyed by the invisible code running in the background. Tiny financial instructions, repeated monthly, rarely questioned, almost never repaired. That is why some people get raises and remain anxious. That is why some people earn decent incomes and still feel one emergency away from humiliation. That is why some people look successful in public and feel hunted in private. Their operating system is routing money toward appearance, urgency, and friction, not toward freedom. I want to make this painfully simple. If your system pays you last, debt first, lifestyle second, taxes blindly, and investing someday later, then your future is not under construction. It is under extraction. You are not building a snowball. You are feeding a leak. I have watched people spend years trying to solve a structural problem with emotional optimism. They tell themselves they will be more disciplined next month. They tell themselves the bonus will fix it. They tell themselves the next raise will finally create breathing room. They tell themselves they will start investing when things calm down. They tell themselves the debt is manageable because everybody has debt. They tell themselves the tax bill is just life. They tell themselves the hobbies are deserved because they work hard. That is how people talk when they do not control the code. The market does not care how sincere you are. Interest does not care how hard you work. Inflation does not care how tired you feel. A bad system can take a good person and keep them financially exhausted for 20 years. So I want to walk straight into the heart of the machine. The first piece of broken code is what I call paycheck inversion. That is the habit of paying yourself last. It is one of the most common financial errors in the world. And because it is common, people treat it as normal. They get paid. And the money immediately begins marching outward. Rent, utilities, streaming, eating out, travel plans, social spending, small comforts, minor impulses, subscription clutter. Then, at the end, after everybody else has taken their turn, they ask whether anything survived for savings. That is backwards. I do not care whether your income is modest or large. If your own future is the last bill you pay, your future will always be underfunded. The moment income hits your account, the first transfer should not be a reward to the world. It should be an act of loyalty to your own balance sheet. That is not selfishness. That is civilization. A person who pays themselves first is writing a different command into the operating system. They are saying before lifestyle expands, before social pressure speaks, before the world starts collecting its tolls, a portion of this income is leaving the battlefield. It is moving to safety. It is moving to reserves. It is moving toward ownership. That one sequence change looks small to the outside. It is not small. Order is destiny. The difference between saving first and saving last is the difference between installing armor before the fight and checking for survivors after the fight. Most people keep acting shocked that nothing is left. Of course, nothing is left. You program nothing to be left, and once you live inside paycheck inversion long enough, a second piece of broken code begins to take over. I call that debt anesthesia. Debt anesthesia is what happens when borrowing stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like normal life support. You swipe for gifts, you swipe for clothes, you swipe for convenience, you swipe to keep the weekend intact, you swipe to keep the self-image intact. You swipe because the minimum payment looks small and the future feels far away. That is not purchasing power. That is delayed surrender. When people get comfortable with bad debt, they stop asking the right question. The right question is not, can I handle the monthly payment? The right question is, if I had to pay cash today, would I still buy this thing? That question cuts through lies instantly. The reason credit card companies are so profitable is not because they discovered a superior moral philosophy. It is because they understand human weakness. They understand that people will trade long-term freedom for short-term emotional relief. They understand that rewards points can distract people from interest rates. They understand that monthly minimums hide the true cost of impatience. An average interest rate in the 20s is not a financial tool for a person who carries balances. It is a wealth shredder. If you are paying 20+% to finance ordinary consumption, you are not using money. Money is using you. I have no interest in elegant stories about how this is just the modern world. The modern world is full of systems designed to profit from your lack of friction. One click, tap to pay. Buy now, pay later, installments, auto-renew, deferred interest. None of this was built to make you rich. It was built to make spending feel painless while the long-term bill remains hidden. That is why I call it debt anesthesia. You do not feel the wound when the decision is made. You feel it months later when your cash flow has lost its flexibility, your savings rate has collapsed, and your mind begins negotiating with itself. People in that position start saying very dangerous things. I deserve this. Everybody finances things. I will pay it off after the next bonus. It is only a little balance. Those are not financial statements. Those are sedation phrases. And sedation is expensive. Now, once paycheck inversion and debt anesthesia have done enough damage, a third failure appears: no buffer, no real reserves, no shock absorber. This is where people discover whether they own a financial life or merely rent one. If you cannot survive several months without new income, then your life may look organized, but it is not durable. One medical bill, one job disruption, one family problem, one rent increase, one car repair, one insurance dispute, one dead laptop, one bad timing event, and suddenly your entire system is asking the credit card to impersonate savings. That is a humiliating place to live, and it happens to more households than most people want to admit. I have always liked margin of safety. I like it in investing because the future is uncertain. I like it in life because the future is uncertain there too. The person with no emergency reserve is not living economically. They are living theatrically. Everything is fine until the stage catches fire. A cash buffer is not lazy money. It is refusal power. That is a phrase worth remembering. Refusal power is what allows you to say no to the wrong job, no to desperate borrowing, no to predatory terms, no to panic selling, no to a terrible deal taken under stress. The person without reserves does not negotiate from principle. They negotiate from exhaustion. That is why I want a person to build reserves before they start fantasizing about financial sophistication. If a household has no emergency buffer and spends its time arguing about which stock will double next year, it is admiring the paint while the foundation cracks. The reserve is not glamorous. That is why so many people avoid it. It does not photograph well. It does not impress neighbors. It does not create a story at dinner. But I will tell you something that matters more than your neighbors. A person with 6 months of real breathing room walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently, and suffers less stupidity from the world. They are not rich yet, but they are harder to trap, and that matters. Then we arrive at one of the strangest habits of all. People do not know their own numbers. I have seen intelligent adults discuss markets, politics, interest rates, and business strategy with great passion while being unable to tell you their monthly burn rate, their true discretionary spending, their annual subscriptions, their debt interest burden, or the amount of money leaking through convenience and habit. That is not ignorance. That is surrender by fog. I call it financial blur. Financial blur is when you keep life just unclear enough that you never have to confront the truth in black and white. You do not look closely because clarity creates responsibility. If you knew the exact numbers, you would have to do something. So people remain vague on purpose. Sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. They know they make money. They feel they spend money. They hope the two things somehow work out. Hope is not a ledger. You cannot control what you refuse to count. And once financial blur takes hold, lifestyle inflation comes in like background software and begins consuming every upgrade you earn. This is one of the cruelest tricks in modern life. Income rises, and within months, the fixed cost of existing quietly rises with it. Better apartment, better neighborhood, better car, better restaurants, better wardrobe, better vacations, better social expectations, better gifts, better standards, better convenience. You think you are moving up. Sometimes you are just making the treadmill more expensive. That is not progress. That is cost escalation disguised as success. I do not hate nice things. I hate unconscious traps. There is a major difference between buying something because it meaningfully improves your life and absorbing a more expensive identity because your income gave you permission. Most people cannot tell the difference because they are not observing the numbers with emotional honesty. They say they want freedom while quietly redesigning their lives to require maximum monthly income. I have no admiration for that. If your raise disappears into a bigger lifestyle before it strengthens your balance sheet, then your raise was not a blessing. It was captured. That is why I like simple arithmetic. Arithmetic has no interest in flattering you. If your income went up by 1,000 and your mandatory outflow climbed by 900, your freedom did not expand very much. Your stress now has better packaging. And if you do not repair that pattern, your hobbies begin joining the attack. Now let me be careful here. I am not against joy. I am against expensive anesthesia disguised as personality. A surprising number of people have hobbies that do not refresh them. They drain them: shopping as entertainment, status dining as recreation, endless gadget churn, seasonal splurges, convenience purchases stacked on convenience purchases, everything justified as a small reward. None of it examined as part of the larger machine. You work hard, you feel pressure, you want relief. So you purchase relief. The trouble is that purchase relief often has to be repurchased. That is not relief. That is a recurring expense with emotional branding. When hobbies and habits become expensive enough, they stop being harmless preferences and start becoming capital predators. They do not only cost you what you spend, they cost you what that money could have become if it had been given time, ownership, and compounding. $100 is not $100 if you are trying to build a future. $100 is a worker you either keep in your factory or send into the street. People who never think this way are constantly firing their future workforce for the sake of small present feelings. I am not arguing for misery. I am arguing for consciousness. There is a big difference between chosen pleasure and a default leak. Chosen pleasure has boundaries. Default leak has momentum. Once you see that, another piece of the operating system becomes obvious. Many people are obsessed with saving money and almost indifferent to increasing earning power. That is a strategic mistake. Saving matters. I like saving. It creates discipline, reserves, and optionality. But saving has a ceiling. There is only so much you can cut. There is only so much coffee you can skip. So many subscriptions you can cancel. So many cheap hacks you can apply. The upside of saving is finite. The upside of earning more skillfully and repeatedly is not finite. That does not mean everybody needs 10 side hustles and a circus act on the internet. It means that wealth is built from both sides of the equation. You need defense and offense. You need leakage control and engine growth. I call the belief that saving alone will make you wealthy. The ceiling illusion makes people feel productive while staying boxed in. They spend hours optimizing tiny expenses while neglecting the far more powerful questions. How can I become more valuable? How can I build skills that command better income? How can I negotiate better? How can I move from pure labor toward ownership? How can I create another stream that is not tied to every hour of my attention? How can I turn reputation into opportunity? Those questions are harder than using a coupon. That is exactly why they matter more. A person who only learns to trim life will remain trapped by the size of their paycheck. A person who learns to grow economic value without automatically inflating lifestyle changes the whole trajectory. This is where I become very direct. If you spend years trying to build wealth without seriously increasing your earning power, your ownership, or your rate of capital formation, you are trying to win a long war with a defensive crouch. You might survive. You probably will not dominate. And survival is not the goal. Strategic freedom is the goal. Now we move to a subject many people avoid because they think it sounds distasteful. Taxes. I have never understood the pride some people take in remaining financially illiterate about taxes. They will study workout plans, travel deals, and restaurant menus with incredible attention, then hand over a massive portion of their economic life without spending any serious effort understanding the rules. Taxes are one of the largest expenses most people will ever have. So why do so many people treat tax ignorance as virtue? I call this the ignorance penalty. The ignorance penalty is what happens when you obey the law but fail to understand it. You pay more than necessary structure, things poorly, miss available shelters, ignore account types that protect growth, fail to use business structures when appropriate, and then tell yourself this is just how life works. Life is hard enough without volunteering for avoidable leakage. There is nothing noble about paying more than the rules require because you are too lazy, too intimidated, or too morally confused to learn. I am talking about legal understanding, not gamesmanship. The person who understands their options keeps more capital working for their own future. The person who does not understand them becomes a passive donor to complexity. That matters because every dollar unnecessarily lost to tax friction is a dollar that cannot compound. And compounding does not merely reward returns. It rewards retained capital. A person who saves diligently, invests sensibly, and uses tax-sheltered accounts intelligently has a very different outcome from a person with the same gross income and weaker structure. Gross income is a headline. Net retained capital is reality. This is why I want people to stop performing innocence and start practicing competence. Do not tell me taxes are boring. So is watching paint dry. And yet one bad tax structure can cost you more than a decade of small spending mistakes. Then we arrive at one of the most expensive forms of procrastination in the modern world, waiting too long to invest. People say they will invest when they know more. They will invest when the market feels safer. They will invest when they have more time. They will invest when they have more money. They will invest after this uncertain period passes. I have heard variations of this all my life. The real translation is simpler. They are waiting to feel comfortable. The market has no contractual duty to make you comfortable before it begins rewarding discipline. Money left idle for too long is not resting. It is shrinking in purchasing power. Inflation is a silent tax collector. It does not need your permission. It simply reduces what idle cash can do over time. Now, I am not telling people to gamble. I am not telling people to rush into assets. They do not understand. I am telling people to stop acting as though delay is neutral. Delay is a decision. Delay is a cost. Delay changes the amount of labor your future self must perform to reach the same destination. This is why the person who builds a reserve, learns the basics, diversifies intelligently, and begins reasonably is living in a different time universe from the person who keeps waiting for certainty. Compounding needs time, the way engines need fuel. If you keep arriving late to your own future, do not blame the math when it refuses to be generous. I call this the someday tax. The someday tax is what you pay for making every good financial decision 1 year later than you should have. 1 year later to save seriously, 1 year later to clear bad debt, 1 year later to build reserves, 1 year later to learn taxes, 1 year later to invest, 1 year later to ask for more money, 1 year later to act like an owner. A year does not sound dramatic, but a financial life is not destroyed or built in one loud scene. It is shaped by accumulated timing decisions. Someday is one of the most expensive words in the language now. When you step back and look at all these habits together, a pattern appears. People think they are struggling with many separate money issues. Often they are suffering from one integrated system failure. They pay themselves last, so savings never lead. They use debt to anesthetize discomfort, so the future keeps getting mortgage. They skip reserves, so stress governs decisions. They avoid their numbers. So leakage stays invisible. They let lifestyle rise with income, so progress gets captured. They confuse hobbies with harmlessness, so cash flow keeps bleeding. They overfocus on cutting, so earning power remains underdeveloped. They ignore taxes, so compounding loses fuel. They delay investing, so time stops working for them. That is not a collection of quirks. That is a broken operating system. And once you understand that, you stop chasing motivational slogans and start rewriting code. That is what I want for you. I do not want you emotionally excited about money for 3 days. I want you strategically transformed. So let me tell you what the repaired code looks like. The repaired code begins with one command. I go first, and Enum arrives. The first movement is not public. It is private. It is toward reserves, towards savings, toward ownership. Before the world bills you for existing, you bill yourself for the future you claim to want. Then the repaired code adds a second command. If I cannot buy it cleanly, I do not let debt disguise desire as necessity. That will offend a culture trained to finance everything from entertainment to identity. Good. A culture that normalizes borrowing for ordinary consumption is not a culture interested in your freedom. It is interested in your obedience. Then comes the third command. I keep cash between myself and panic. That means real reserves, not optimism, not available credit, not the assumption that next month will behave reserves. Because a person with reserves can think. A person without reserves can only react. Then the fourth command, I know my numbers without flinching. I know what comes in. I know what goes out. I know what is fixed. I know what is discretionary. I know where my leaks live. I know what lifestyle inflation is trying to do to me. I do not use vagueness as emotional protection. Then the fifth command, I choose pleasures. I do not rent them on autopilot. I do not confuse constant spending with a rich life. A rich life is not one where you can consume endlessly. A rich life is one where you have increasing control over your days, your stress, your decisions, your associations, and your future. That is very different. Then the sixth command, I cut waste, but I do not build my future on trimming scraps alone. I expand value. I grow skills. I strengthen reputation. I seek better economics. I think like someone building earning power, not merely someone avoiding expense. Then the seventh command, I learn the rules that govern my money. I refuse the ignorance penalty. I use the structures available to me. I make legal decisions that keep more capital working on my side of the table. Then the eighth command, I begin investing once the foundation is strong enough, because time is one of the few assets I can never buy back. I do not worship perfect timing. I respect sensible timing. And sensible timing usually looks a lot less dramatic than people want. It looks like starting before you feel like an expert. It looks like consistency before confidence. It looks like process before excitement. That repaired operating system does not create instant applause. It creates something better. Silence, calm, options, lower cortisol, better sleep, more honest choices, less dependence on lucky timing, more room to think. That is what financial progress is supposed to feel like, not louder, stronger. People often imagine freedom as visible luxury. I rarely do. When I look at financial freedom, I see reduced compulsion. I see a person who is no longer bullied by monthly obligations, no longer seduced by bad debt, no longer blind to their own numbers, no longer trapped by income that immediately disappears, no longer terrified of emergencies, no longer waiting for permission to invest in their future. That person may not look dramatic from the outside. They are still dangerous in the best sense. They are hard to manipulate. They are hard to rush. They are hard to sell fear to. They are hard to trap with status games. They are hard to tax through ignorance. They are hard to exhaust with false urgency. That is the kind of person I would rather be than someone who looks richer for a season and remains fragile for a decade. Now let me go one layer deeper, because this is where the whole thing becomes personal. Every financial habit is also an identity habit. When you pay yourself last, you are telling yourself that your future has lower status than your present appetites. When you carry bad debt for ordinary consumption, you are telling yourself that short-term relief outranks long-term self-respect. When you refuse to build reserves, you are telling yourself that optimism is an acceptable substitute for preparation. When you avoid your numbers, you are telling yourself that emotional comfort matters more than factual control. When you let lifestyle inflate with income, you are telling yourself that visible upgrade matters more than invisible strength. When you never seriously increase earning power, you are telling yourself that your current economic ceiling deserves obedience. When you ignore taxes, you are telling yourself that complexity deserves more respect than your own future. When you delay investing, you are telling yourself that fear should control the calendar. This is why personal finance is not really about math alone. It is about command. Who is in charge when a paycheck lands? Who is in charge when temptation appears? Who is in charge when stress enters the room? Who is in charge when the culture says you should look richer before you are stronger? Who is in charge when the market asks you to begin before you feel fully ready? If the answer is not you, then it does not matter how smart you sound. The operating system still belongs to someone else. I have no desire to make this gentle. A lot of financial pain that looks mysterious is not mysterious at all. It is just uncorrected sequence. You do not need another year of vague intention. You do not need another season of pretending small leaks. Do not matter. You do not need another cycle of raises being eaten by new obligations. You do not need more elegant excuses about why later will be easier. You need new code. You need to decide that the next paycheck will not enter the same machine that damaged the last 100. You need to decide that debt will no longer be permitted to impersonate income. You need to decide that reserves are not optional. You need to decide that your numbers will become visible. You need to decide that lifestyle expansion needs your permission. You need to decide that earning power deserves as much attention as spending restraint. You need to decide that tax ignorance is over. You need to decide that investing begins before comfort blesses it. That is how an ordinary person starts becoming strategically uncommon. And let me tell you something I have learned over a very long lifetime. The world will always offer you 1,000 ways to feel rich for a moment. Very few systems will help you become strong for a lifetime. Feeling rich is easy to finance. Strength is harder. Strength requires order. Strength requires refusal. Strength requires patience. Strength requires accepting that the most important financial moves are often the least theatrical. A reserve account is not exciting. A lower debt burden is not exciting. A cleaner tax structure is not exciting. Automatic investing is not exciting. Tracking your numbers is not exciting. Refusing lifestyle creep is not exciting. But none of those things are supposed to entertain you. They are supposed to free you. That is the distinction most people miss. They want financial progress to feel thrilling. I want financial progress to make you harder to kill. So here is the test. The next time money enters your life, look at what happens in the first hour. That first hour tells the truth. Not your intentions, not your goals written on paper, not the identity you describe to other people. The first hour tells the truth. Does the money go first to your future, or does it begin serving the system that has already trained you to stay dependent? Does it build reserves, or does it feed appearances? Does it reduce fragility, or does it preserve habits? Does it move toward ownership, or does it disappear into noise? You do not need a perfect life to answer that question. You need honesty, because if you keep running broken code, the outcome is not mysterious. More stress, more delay, more dependence. More years spent wondering why effort does not seem to convert into control. But if you rewrite the operating system, truly rewrite it, not cosmetically, not emotionally, but structurally, then something powerful begins to happen. Money stops acting like a series of emergencies. It starts acting like a tool, then a worker, then a reserve, then a shield, then an engine, and eventually, if you stay rational long enough, it becomes something most people chase without understanding. Choice, that is the door, not a luxury car, not a bigger house purchased to keep pace with people you do not even like, not a pile of rewards points earned while paying ruinous interest, not the illusion of sophistication without reserves. Choice. The choice to walk away, the choice to wait, the choice to invest, the choice to say no, the choice to live with less noise and more control. So decide. You can keep telling yourself the problem is income, bad luck, the economy, timing, inflation, the tax system, the market, your age, your background, your stress, or your obligations, or you can admit the harsher truth. A large part of your future will be decided by the operating system you are willing to run from this point forward. One system keeps you reactive. The other builds refusal power, ownership, compounding, and peace. One system pays everybody else first and leaves your future begging for scraps. The other system pays your future first and forces the rest of life to fit inside reality. One system is common, the other system is free. Pick one.